When Tom bought his dream home outside HOA control, he expected peace. What he got was a neighbor named Karen, and a secret pipeline from his water supply straight into her pool. Bad move, Karen. Tom never expected his dream home would come bundled with a neighborhood nightmare. After years of working long hours as a civil engineer, he finally found the perfect property on the outskirts of Scottsdale, Arizona. A single-story, adobe-style house with solar panels, a xeriscaped yard, and most importantly, no strings attached. The real estate listing had made it clear. The home was situated just outside the Oak Hollow HOA boundary. No fees, no committees, and no rules about what kind of mailbox he could have. For a practical man like Tom, it was paradise. His first few days in the new home were blissful. The house had excellent insulation, a quiet backyard, and a distant view of the mountains. Tom spent his mornings unpacking and his evenings sipping iced tea under the patio's shade, listening to the wind move through the desert brush. A few neighbors waved politely in passing, and he assumed he had found peace. Then came Karen. It happened on the fourth day, as Tom was resealing a section of the front driveway. A woman in her late 40s with a sharp blonde bob and oversized sunglasses marched across the street like she owned the asphalt. Dressed in immaculate yoga gear and clutching a clipboard, she wore the unmistakable air of someone used to telling others what to do. Without any greeting, she stopped in front of his property line and raised her chin. "You must be the new homeowner," she said. Karen Owens, president of the Oak Hollow Homeowners Association. Tom wiped his hands on a rag. "Tom, yeah, nice to meet you, but I'm not part of the HOA. Karen smiled tightly, as though she hadn't heard him. "Well, just so you know, the color of your exterior trim doesn't quite match our neighborhood palette. We prefer desert neutrals, sandy beige, warm taupe. That gray is a bit harsh." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Good to know. But again, I'm not in the HOA. Karen's smile stiffened. "Sure, but we try to maintain a cohesive look. It's for property values, you understand." Tom nodded politely, but his gut twisted. Something told him this wasn't the last he'd hear from Karen. About 2 weeks after settling in, Tom began to notice something strange. It started with the water bill, a digital notice that arrived in his inbox, showing usage nearly double what he expected. At first, he assumed it was a mistake. Maybe a pipe was dripping somewhere, or perhaps the desert heat had caused the irrigation system to overwork. Still, he had designed efficient systems for a living, and his own setup was tightly controlled. He checked the sprinklers, the toilets, the water heater. Nothing stood out. Then came the issue with water pressure. One morning while brushing his teeth, the water slowed to a frustrating trickle. He turned off the tap, waited, turned it back on. Normal again. Odd. A few days later, while rinsing dishes after dinner, the same thing happened. The pressure would fluctuate at strange hours, usually early in the morning, or late at night. His curiosity was piqued, but he wasn't ready to jump to conclusions. Maybe the city was doing maintenance. But then came the hissing. Just after midnight on a Tuesday, Tom stepped out onto his back patio for some cool air. The desert was quiet, save for the chirp of insects and the distant rustle of wind. Then he heard it, faint but unmistakable, the sound of pressurized water gurgling through pipes. He followed the noise to the side of the house, near the water main. There, half buried under decorative gravel and a patch of succulents, was a suspiciously new-looking extension valve with fresh PVC piping leading off his property, directly toward the back fence that bordered Karen's yard. Tom crouched beside the pipe, inspecting it. It wasn't part of the original plumbing he'd seen in the home inspection. No permit sticker, No documentation. No reason for it to exist. Especially not running under the fence. His stomach dropped. He hadn't wanted to believe it, but someone had definitely tapped into his water line, and judging by the direction of the pipe, he had a pretty solid guess who. Trying to keep calm, Tom returned inside and jotted down every observation. He checked his outdoor security camera footage but found nothing obvious. Whoever had done it had worked behind the blind spot near the meter. He knew he needed evidence before confronting anyone. But in his gut, he already knew. This wasn't just odd behavior or coincidence. Someone was stealing his water. Determined to confirm his suspicions, Tom spent the next few days quietly gathering evidence. He repositioned one of his outdoor security cameras to capture the blind spot near the water main and installed a second motion-activated cam behind a decorative planter near the fence. It wasn't overkill. It was necessary. If someone really had the audacity to connect to his water supply, they likely wouldn't stop unless caught in the act. He also purchased a clamp-on flow sensor to monitor water usage in real time, watching for unusual spikes. The following Saturday, his patience paid off. Around 5:23 a.m., the flow monitor registered a sudden surge in water draw, roughly the equivalent of filling a large tank. The sprinklers weren't scheduled, and he wasn't using any appliances. He opened the security footage and hit play. The motion sensor had triggered just minutes before the spike. On screen, 2 uniformed men appeared with a service cart and tools. They walked with casual confidence, clearly not worried about being spotted. One of them approached the newly added PVC valve near Tom's main, twisted it open with a wrench, and then both vanished through the gap in the fence leading to Karen's yard. Tom's heart pounded in disbelief. He reviewed the footage 3 times just to be sure. The cart was filled with pool cleaning supplies, pool maintenance workers, and they weren't servicing his pool. He didn't even have one. Later that morning, Tom took a long walk around the perimeter of his property, stopping by the section of the fence the men had walked through. It looked like a normal boundary, until he noticed a section of boards had been modified to swing open like a hidden gate. Secured only with a magnetic latch and cleverly disguised to blend in, it led directly into Karen's backyard. Peering through the cracks, Tom saw it. A gleaming in-ground pool, crystal clear, with a brand new filtration system humming softly in the early light. Just beside it, barely hidden behind her shrubs, ran the same white PVC line that connected, illegally and undeniably, to his water supply. The scope of the theft left Tom stunned. This wasn't a one-time incident or casual use of a hose. Karen had engineered a hidden connection from his main line into her filtration system and pool top-off valve. And based on the automated nature of the setup, she had been drawing from his water daily. Tom returned inside, printed screenshots from the footage, made backups of the video files, and carefully documented the evidence. It wasn't just theft. It was premeditated, hidden, and brazen. She hadn't just trespassed. She'd plumbed herself a pipeline straight into his home. By Sunday morning, Tom had made up his mind. No more waiting, no more quiet investigation. It was time to confront Karen face to face. Armed with printed photos and a flash drive of video evidence, he crossed the street just after 9. The sun was already heating the stucco walls of Oak Hollow, and a pair of hummingbirds darted through the air as if they sensed the tension. Karen was outside watering her neatly trimmed hedge with a bright green hose. His water, he realized with grim irony. She looked up as he approached, her face tightening into a rehearsed, neighborly smile. "Tom, good morning," she said cheerfully, but her eyes were cautious. "Everything all right?" Tom didn't return the smile. "Karen, we need to talk. Now." Her expression shifted, a flicker of annoyance showing through. "Of course. Is something wrong?" Without a word, Tom held out the printouts. The sequence of photos, Plumbers opening the hidden valve, walking through the disguised fence gate, the exposed PVC line trailing into her yard, spoke for itself. Karen's eyes scanned the pages, and for a brief moment, the blood drained from her face. Then she laughed, a short, dismissive scoff that echoed in the quiet street. "Oh, that," she said, waving the papers like they were a child's drawing. "Tom, don't be so dramatic. It's just water. You've got a full house over there and no pool. It's not like you're using all of it." Tom blinked. "Karen, you illegally connected your pool to my supply. That's theft." She tilted her head and crossed her arms, adopting a patronizing tone. "Come on, be reasonable. The HOA's water bills have skyrocketed, and we're trying to conserve. You're not part of the association, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do your part for the community." Tom narrowed his eyes. "You think that gives you the right to tap into my utilities without asking? Without telling me?" Karen shrugged. "I asked our maintenance guys to hook it up. It's not like I broke into your house. Besides, the neighborhood expects a certain standard, and my pool is a centerpiece for block events. You don't even attend those." Tom's voice was cold. "Because I'm not in your HOA, Karen, and that means you have zero authority over me or my property. You know that." Karen's tone sharpened. "Well, maybe you should be in the HOA. Everyone else is. You're the only one on this street who's exempt. It creates confusion." "That's your problem," Tom snapped, "not mine. What you did is a crime." Her smile returned, tight and brittle. "You really want to go to war over water? Over a few gallons a day?" Tom stepped back, his voice low but firm. "I'm not going to argue with you anymore, but I am going to take this to the authorities." Karen's smugness faltered. She gripped the hose like a lifeline. "Tom, let's not escalate this. I'm sure we can reach an understanding. I'll contribute to your water bill, maybe." He didn't answer. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing in her manicured yard, dripping hose forgotten at her feet. For the first time, Karen didn't look like the queen of the cul-de-sac. She looked cornered, and Tom was just getting started. Tom wasted no time. That same afternoon, he began calling contractors. If Karen thought she could leech off his utilities without consequence, she was about to get a crash course in unintended consequences. After explaining the situation to a trusted plumber he'd worked with during the home inspection, Tom scheduled a full overhaul of his property's outdoor water lines. But this wasn't just about cutting her off. It was about making sure she could never pull a stunt like this again. By Monday morning, the crew arrived and got to work. Tom stood by as they excavated the PVC extension Karen's contractors had quietly snaked onto his land, severing it cleanly and capping the main valve with a reinforced, tamper-proof lockbox. But he didn't stop there. He had a plan, one that was both functional and deliciously poetic. He'd always wanted a backyard plunge pool, and now seemed like the perfect time. But instead of using a traditional chlorine system, Tom opted for a saltwater system, more efficient, easier on the skin, and crucially, completely incompatible with standard pool filtration systems like the one Karen had installed. The conversion took the rest of the week. The plumbing was rerouted, the tank installed, and a new filtration unit connected exclusively to the saltwater system. By the time it was finished, Tom's property no longer provided Karen with clean, chlorinated water. Instead, any hidden pipe she might have left connected would now pull in high salinity brine, enough to wreak havoc on her system without damaging Tom's own. But Tom wasn't finished. He wanted this documented. He compiled every bit of footage, transaction records from the contractors, timestamps from his water monitor, and before and after photos of the plumbing work. Then, with everything neatly packaged, he filed a formal complaint with both the local police and the Arizona Department of Water Resources. Water theft was no minor offense, especially in a drought-sensitive state like Arizona. He also copied the complaint to Oak Hollow's HOA suburban board, not because he expected them to take his side, but because he wanted the issue on the record. Within days, he received a visit from a water department investigator. The man was professional, but visibly intrigued as Tom laid out the story. Illegal plumbing, a disguised connection, unauthorized water draw, and then the saltwater switch. The investigator chuckled quietly as he made notes. "She really thought she'd get away with this?" he asked, shaking his head. "She still might think she has," Tom replied dryly. "But I'm betting that changes real soon." And change it did. 3 days later, a commotion stirred across the street. Tom, sipping coffee on his porch, watched as a pair of pool techs emerged from Karen's yard, visibly frustrated. Their conversation carried in the dry air. "Whole system's corroding," one of them muttered. "Pump seals are shot. That's salt water, not chlorine. Who the hell hooked this up?" Tom leaned back in his chair, quiet satisfaction spreading across his face. He didn't wave. He didn't gloat. He just watched the consequences unfold, one grain of salt at a time. Karen's reaction was immediate and loud. The morning after her pool guys delivered the bad news, her voice rang across the neighborhood like a siren. Tom didn't need to hear every word to get the gist. She was furious. He watched from behind tinted windows as she paced her backyard on the phone, gesturing wildly at her now cloudy pool. The water had turned a pale, murky blue. The salt had corroded her pump, warped the filters, and turned her prized turquoise oasis into a bubbling mess. By noon, Karen was at his door. She didn't knock. She banged. Tom opened the door slowly, arms crossed, waiting for the inevitable. "What the hell did you do to my pool?" she shrieked, not even pretending to be civil anymore. Tom kept his voice calm. "You mean the pool illegally connected to my water supply?" Karen's face contorted. "You poisoned it. That's sabotage. I'm calling the HOA and the police. You'll pay for this." "I didn't poison anything," he said flatly. "I changed my system, on my property. I have permits, receipts, and full documentation. I've already reported your illegal tap-in to the authorities." She faltered for a split second, eyes scanning his face for any hint of bluff. But Tom had none. He wasn't angry. He was resolved. Karen pivoted. "This affects the whole neighborhood, you know. You're creating division. People are starting to ask questions. This isn't just about me." "Oh, I'm counting on that," Tom said and shut the door. And indeed, people were talking. Within a week, word of the pool incident had spread. Quiet at first. Just murmurs during dog walks or passing chats by mailboxes. But soon, more public. Some neighbors who once politely smiled at Karen now avoided eye contact. Others began sharing their own grievances. HOA overreach, strange water fees, accusations about Karen unilaterally approving projects, or charging fines without proper votes. Tom's complaint had also triggered a formal investigation. A water department representative showed up again, this time to inspect Karen's setup directly. With them came an HOA liaison. Reluctantly sent by the board after Tom's forwarded documentation made ignoring the matter impossible. Tom didn't attend the inspection, but he didn't have to. The fallout echoed down the block. Karen tried to argue that her actions had been sanctioned. A community initiative, she claimed. But she had no approval paperwork. The board was blindsided. Worse, the hidden pipe and disguised valve were now classified as both unauthorized construction and water theft under county regulations. When an HOA member privately confided in Tom days later, they admitted the board was scrambling. "She's been doing things behind our backs," he said. You just shined a light on it. Karen wasn't just facing plumbing bills anymore. She was facing full-blown exposure. Within 3 weeks, the house of cards Karen had built began to collapse. The HOA board, eager to distance itself from scandal, held an emergency meeting, one that for the first time in Tom's memory included invitations to all residents, including those technically outside HOA boundaries. Tom didn't plan to attend, but when a neighbor personally handed him a flyer and said, "You really should be there," he reconsidered. The community center buzzed with quiet tension that evening. Residents filled the chairs, most holding copies of the HOA charter or water department notices. Karen arrived late, flanked by 2 board members who looked more nervous than supportive. She took a seat near the front, arms crossed, avoiding everyone's gaze. When the board president opened the floor, a line formed instantly. One by one, residents shared stories. Small fines issued without proper notice. Architectural requests that were mysteriously denied while Karen's own home was approved for lavish upgrades. A sudden hike in community dues last spring that was never explained, and then came Tom. He stood, cleared his throat, and briefly, calmly told his story. He avoided theatrics. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stated facts. The illegal connection, the hidden valve, the documentation he'd gathered, the saltwater system he'd installed on his private property, and the aftermath. The room was silent throughout. When he finished, he handed a printed copy of the timeline to the board and sat back down. Karen, red-faced and fidgeting, tried to speak, but the board cut her off. "We've heard enough," the president said. "This matter is no longer an internal discussion. It's now part of a formal HOA audit and under legal review." 2 days later, the board released a statement. Karen was removed from her position as HOA president, effective immediately. A third-party firm was being brought in to audit past decisions, and several of her previous approvals were frozen pending further review. But that wasn't the end of it. The city's water department, following their investigation, filed charges of utility theft and unauthorized system modification. Fines were levied, not minor ones either. Karen was ordered to pay not only for the estimated water usage, but also the cost of investigating and repairing city-monitored junction points. She tried to appeal, but the evidence Tom had provided was airtight. The final blow came when her own insurance refused to cover the damage to her pool system. The adjuster's report cited negligence and unauthorized modifications as the cause. Replacing the system would cost thousands out of pocket, money Karen didn't have, especially now that HOA legal support was no longer backing her. Weeks passed. Her once pristine front lawn grew patchy and faded in the Arizona sun. Fewer and fewer people stopped to chat. Tom, meanwhile, enjoyed the quiet. His saltwater plunge pool sparkled in the heat, untouched and fully private. Neighbors who once kept their distance now waved, sometimes stopping to thank him. "You stood up," one said, "and we all needed that." By late summer, a moving truck appeared in front of Karen's house. She didn't wave goodbye. She didn't even look back. The woman who once believed herself queen of the cul-de-sac left with nothing but her lawn ornaments and a dented pool skimmer. Tom watched from his porch, a cold glass of tea in hand. For the first time in months, the neighborhood felt calm, and as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across his driveway, Tom allowed himself a quiet smile. Sometimes justice doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it just tastes like salt water.